It really feels like we're just drowning in data these days. Everywhere you turn, it's incredible. And honestly, trying to make sense of it all can be completely overwhelming.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're going to be diving into today. We're going to be looking at the book Outside Inside, Navigating a World Drowning in Data by Jorn Lyseggen. And joining me, as always, is our data expert.
Yay.
Now, this book is packed with some seriously insightful concepts about how to use data effectively to make smarter decisions. Not just any data, but this idea of external insight.
Yeah, right from the start, Lyseggen lays out this core idea of external insight. He argues that it's really a new way of thinking about decision-making.
And I love that he calls it external insight. It's about looking beyond your own company walls, going outside your internal data and tapping into this vast universe of information online. It's like getting this early warning system for your business. Instead of just looking at, say, your own sales figures, you're getting a read on the entire market. And for our listeners, people who are hungry for knowledge, who want to be ahead of the curve, this is where it gets interesting. We're going to distill the key takeaways.
Absolutely.
Those surprising facts, some real aha moments from this book, without getting bogged down.
It can get pretty dense in there.
Oh, yeah, without getting bogged down in too much detail. So our goal today is to really understand how we can use external data to make smarter, more informed decisions.
Yeah, to get that competitive edge.
Exactly. And we'll be drawing from Lyseggen's book, of course, as well as looking at some really interesting real-world examples. Now, Lyseggen's journey to this concept of external insight actually started back in 2001.
It did?
He had his own kind of light bulb moment. What was the trigger for him? What got him thinking along these lines?
Well, back in 2001, he had this realization that the amount of information online was simply exploding. And he saw very clearly that it was getting to a point where humans couldn't keep up.
Right.
Manually trying to sift through it all and actually pull out meaningful insights was just becoming impossible.
Right.
So that was the genesis of this idea. Creating software that could do the heavy lifting.
Right.
Software that could automatically analyze this flood of data. And that, of course, is the origin story of Meltwater.
Right. Started in Oslo, Norway. Just two guys.
Yeah.
Coffee machine.
Oh, yeah. Shack 15, they called their little office.
Shack 15. $15,000 to get it going.
A shoestring budget.
Shoestring budget. And initially, their aim was to provide executives with a daily digest of the global business world. So basically, keeping tabs on their competitors, their key customers, brand mentions, all from online sources.
Right.
Informed decisions was their motto.
It does sound quaint now, thinking about how much the internet has evolved since then.
Oh, absolutely. It's quaint. And back then, they were primarily focused on online news articles and company websites. But what they hadn't fully anticipated was the incredible rise of social media. I mean, think about it. Facebook in 2004.
Yeah.
Twitter in 2006. Blogs really taking off around 2007. That was a game changer.
It was a complete game changer. Suddenly you had this massive influx of new content online.
Right.
And the old ways of analyzing data just didn't cut it anymore. It demanded a completely new level of sophistication.
And that's where the real tech magic comes in, right?
Yeah.
Lyseggen talks about how now we're talking about AI, natural language processing, machine learning, big data.
Absolutely.
All working together to generate these insightful reports from this constant flood of information.
It's a fire hose, really.
It is a fire hose, and that's actually what led Meltwater to evolve from this small startup into a global company. I mean, they now serve over 25,000 clients.
Wow.
Across industries.
Yeah. All over the world, over 100 countries.
When it's not just big corporations.
No. Their client base is really diverse. You have small businesses, local businesses, all the way up to multinational corporations.
Right.
In fact, they work with about half of the Fortune Global 500.
That's incredible.
They even mention clients like Coca-Cola.
Oh, wow.
And even the Vatican.
The Vatican.
Vatican.
That's mind-blowing. Really shows you how broad the applications of this approach are.
It does.
And one of the things that really struck me is how Lyseggen highlights some unexpected ways that external data is being used. In the preface, he mentions the University of Oslo tracking how quickly new spellings are being adopted.
That's interesting.
And then there's this Swedish window company that's using reports of burglaries to identify potential customers.
Makes sense. Broken windows.
And then European governments looking into insider trading in online chat groups. I mean, these are not the typical use cases you think of when you hear data analysis.
They're not, but it really underscores the point that Lyseggen's making, that the way we use online information, it's going to fundamentally change how we make strategic decisions. He sees this as a seismic shift.
And the key point, I think, is that the internet has become this treasure trove of information about consumers, about your competitors, but it's largely untapped.
Yeah.
It's there for the taking, but you need the right tools and the right mindset to access it and use it effectively. Now, one of the key concepts that Lyseggen introduces in the book is this idea of digital breadcrumbs.
Oh, yeah. A great term.
What are digital breadcrumbs? Can you break that down for us?
Sure. It's all about the traces of information that both organizations and individuals leave behind as they navigate the online world. It's the data we consciously and unconsciously share through our digital activities.
So every tweet, every website visit, it's leaving a trail.
Exactly. It's a trail. And those trails, those breadcrumbs, can tell us a lot if we know how to read them.
Right. And Lyseggen gives this really interesting example in the book from a VentureBeat report back in April 2016. It's about Apple and how they apparently fired all their recruitment consultants. And then just before announcing their first quarterly revenue decline in 13 years, which then led to this massive drop in their market capitalization.
Wow.
Something like $58 billion.
Huge.
It's huge. And this really illustrates how these external signals can sometimes be a canary in the coal mine.
Right.
They can foreshadow what's happening internally within a company.
Right.
So for our listeners, pay attention to those subtle cues. Even seemingly minor things can sometimes be a sign of bigger shifts happening beneath the surface. Now, the interesting thing about these digital breadcrumbs is that they often come from sources that people tend to overlook.
That's true.
Lyseggen talks about job postings, social media activity, content on blogs, even patent applications. What can we learn from those kinds of sources?
Well, you might not immediately think of job postings as a source of competitive intelligence.
Right.
But if a company's suddenly ramping up hiring for, say, a specific type of engineer,
Right.
that could be a sign they're developing a new product. Social media, of course, is a goldmine for understanding what your customers are thinking and feeling.
Right.
In real time.
Real time.
Blogs that can give you insights into industry trends, thought leadership, emerging technologies, and patent applications. They can reveal a company's long-term R&D plans.
Right. So it's about connecting the dots.
It is.
Looking at these seemingly disparate pieces of information and seeing the bigger picture.
It's about understanding that the internet is essentially a giant jigsaw puzzle.
Right.
And each of these breadcrumbs is a piece of that puzzle.
Yeah.
And when you start putting those pieces together, you get a much clearer picture of what's happening in your market, what your competitors are up to, where the opportunities lie.
And Lyseggen argues that companies that are good at leveraging these new types of data,
They have a distinct advantage.
they have an unfair advantage almost.
It's almost like an unfair advantage because most companies are still so focused on traditional data sources.
Right. Now, the book is full of these amazing stories about how companies and organizations are actually using external insight in the real world.
Yeah.
I want to dig into some of those stories.
Absolutely.
One that really struck me was about the New York Police Department using Facebook data to solve a murder case.
That was a powerful one.
Really powerful. No eyewitnesses to the crime, but they were able to piece together the events using social media posts.
Yeah. Incredible how digital evidence has become so crucial.
It's mind-blowing. It was a gang-related shooting, and through analyzing the online activity of various individuals, investigators were able to connect them to the crime scene and even understand the motives behind the shooting.
Right.
So for our listeners, this isn't just about business intelligence. This stuff has real-world applications in law enforcement in so many different fields.
Absolutely.
And then there's an early story of YouTube.
Yeah.
And how they were benchmarking their media coverage against their competitors.
Yeah.
That was really clever. Basically, they were tracking how often they were being mentioned in the media compared to other video sharing platforms.
Right.
Even in their early days, they could see that they were way ahead in terms of media mentions.
They were.
And that was a strong external signal of their future dominance.
Right. So for you, even early-stage companies, they can benefit from tracking these kinds of external metrics.
Absolutely. It gives you valuable validation.
Yeah.
And it helps you understand where you stand in the market.
Okay, let's talk about some more concrete business outcomes.
It's okay.
There's the story of Racetrack, the gas station, and convenience store chain.
Yeah, I like that one.
They were able to improve their revenue forecast accuracy by a whopping 15% by using external leading indicators.
15%, that's huge.
It's huge. They incorporated things like weather patterns,
Makes sense.
construction statistics in their areas, commodity prices, manufacturing trends.
Right.
They moved from subjective, I think, to data-backed predictions.
Much more sophisticated.
And the results speak for themselves. They do.
It's a real game changer for their bottom line. Now, let's move on to some marketing success stories.
Okay.
Daniel Wellington watches.
Yeah, that's a classic.
They exploded onto the scene using Instagram as their primary marketing channel. They understood where their target audience was spending their time online, and they leveraged that brilliantly.
Right. Influencer marketing before it was really a thing.
They were early adopters.
They were.
And it paid off big time. They became a top-selling watch brand in just 4 years.
It's remarkable.
It is. And it shows you the power of understanding your audience and meeting them where they are. Now, here's another interesting one.
Okay.
The Indian messaging app Hike.
Hike, yeah.
They actually managed to surpass Facebook Messenger in India.
Wow, that's impressive.
It is. And they did it by using social media analytics to inform their product development.
Really listening to what users were saying.
Yeah. They were paying attention to the conversations online, understanding what features and functionalities people were asking for, and they incorporated that feedback into their product.
That's smart.
So even against a giant like Facebook, they were able to gain a competitive edge by being really in tune with their users.
The power of external data.
The power of external data. And it's not just about established companies either. The European VC firm,
EQT, right?
They've built this AI-powered platform called Motherbrain.
Motherbrain, yeah. Catchy name.
Catchy name. And they're using it to identify promising early-stage companies.
Really interesting.
They're tracking online breadcrumbs like job postings,
Okay.
social media topics, media coverage. So they're looking for the subtle signals,
The early indicator.
the early indicators that a company might be on the verge of something big.
Right.
And finally, there's Meltwater's own story.
Oh, yeah.
Their accurate prediction of the 2016 Brexit vote and Trump's election victory.
Yeah, that made headlines.
They were using social media analysis to gauge public sentiment.
And they were often in contrast to traditional polling data.
Right. Which really highlights the potential of this approach to capture those underlying trends and shifts in opinion. Now, Lyseggen argues that many companies are still too focused on their own internal data.
Yeah, he's a big advocate for looking outward.
He calls it looking in the rearview mirror. What are some of the limitations of this approach?
Well, he's not saying internal data is bad.
Right.
It's essential for understanding your own operations.
Right.
But the problem is it's historical data.
It's lagging.
It's lagging. Yeah, it tells you what happened in the past.
Right.
But it doesn't necessarily give you a clear view of what's coming next.
It's like driving using only your rearview mirror.
Exactly. You can see where you've been, but you're going to miss those curves up ahead.
Right. And you might crash. He also talks about this danger of insular bias.
Yeah.
What's insular bias?
It's that limited worldview that develops when you're only looking at your own internal data. You miss the bigger picture.
Right. You're in your own little bubble.
You're in your bubble.
Right.
And you might misinterpret what's happening in the market.
Right.
You might miss emerging threats. Or you might fail to see those new opportunities that are right around the corner.
Right.
Without actively looking outside, it's really hard to get an accurate assessment of your true competitive position.
And he gives a really interesting example from Meltwater's own experience.
Oh, yeah.
Their Canadian office was struggling.
Okay.
And based on the internal data,
The numbers weren't looking good.
the numbers were not looking good.
Yeah.
They were considering shutting it down.
Right.
But instead, they decided to double down.
They invested in the team.
They invested in the team, they brought in new management, and they focused on building a stronger team culture.
Yeah.
And guess what? The office turned around.
Wow.
It became a huge success.
It shows that sometimes
It shows that sometimes the numbers don't tell the whole story.
they don't.
There were other factors at play. Employee morale, passion, leadership, things that spreadsheets can't always capture. Now let's talk about a really cautionary tale.
Where?
BlackBerry.
BlackBerry.
They were once the dominant player in the smartphone market.
Right. Everyone had a BlackBerry.
Everyone had a BlackBerry.
Yeah.
And their internal data, their user numbers, their revenues,
Yeah.
they were all growing.
Looked good on paper.
Everything looked great on paper.
Yeah.
But what they missed was the touchscreen revolution,
Right?
led by companies like Apple,
The iPhone?
the iPhone, and Android devices.
Right.
And if they had been paying attention to external data, market share data,
Mm-hmm.
competitor analysis, they would seen the writing on the wall,
They would see that the market was shifting.
that consumer preferences were changing, and they failed to adapt. And ultimately, they paid the price.
It's a classic example of disruption.
It is, and
Yeah.
it highlights how an internal focus can blind you to those crucial shifts that are happening outside your company walls. And Lyseggen uses this great analogy of Admiral Nelson at the Battle of Copenhagen.
Oh, yeah.
He famously ignored the signal to retreat.
Stuck to his plan.
Stuck to his plan, even though the situation had changed. And he won the battle, but it's a reminder that sometimes you need to be willing to adapt, to change course.
To see the bigger picture.
To see the bigger picture. And that's what external data allows you to do.
Absolutely.
It gives you that broader perspective. Okay, so Chapter 2 really drives home the limitations of relying solely on internal data.
It does.
Now, in Chapter 3, Lyseggen really digs into the concept of external data as foresight.
Oh, yeah. A powerful idea.
He starts the chapter with the example of Racetrack. We talked about them earlier.
Yeah, improving their sales forecasts.
They used external data, weather patterns, construction stats, commodity prices to get a much more accurate picture of what their future sales were going to be.
Right.
And Lyseggen argues that this underutilization of readily available online business insights is one of the biggest blind spots in corporate decision-making today.
I think he's right. There's so much information out there.
There is.
But companies aren't using it to its full potential.
And he talks about how external data can be used to understand the forces of industry competition. He specifically mentions Porter's 5 Forces framework.
Oh, yeah.
That classic business school framework for analyzing the competitive dynamics of an industry. And it can be applied using external data, so you can get a real-time understanding of the intensity of rivalry, the threat of new entrants, the bargaining power of buyers and suppliers, the threat of substitute products.
Right. It gives you this dynamic picture of the competitive landscape.
It does. Okay, let's talk about another cautionary tale. Kodak.
Oh, Kodak. The classic example.
The inventor of the digital camera.
Ironic.
It's ironic. They failed to adapt to the digital revolution, and a big part of that failure was their inability to see and act on external data. The trends were all there.
They were.
Declining analog camera market share,
Right.
rapidly decreasing film sales.
Right.
But they were so focused on their profitable film business,
They missed the boat.
they completely missed the boat. They had their heads in the sand. They were looking internally. And even in 2005, Antonio Perez,
The CEO.
the CEO, his vision for Kodak was still centered on print.
Oh, wow.
He was missing the fundamental shift in consumer behavior towards digital image capture and sharing.
It's amazing how they couldn't see it.
It is. Now, in contrast to Kodak's story,
Okay.
there's the story of Instagram.
Instagram, yeah. A great success story.
The founders noticed the popularity of photo sharing on their initial app,
Bourbon, wasn't?
Bourbonin. It was a location-based app, and they pivoted.
Smart move.
They focused entirely on photos, and they grew their user base rapidly.
Exponentially.
Exponentially.
Right.
And then Facebook acquired them for $1 billion just days after they launched on Android,
Wow.
which shows that Mark Zuckerberg was paying attention
He was.
to those external signals, to the growth of a potential competitor.
Right, even though Facebook was already this massive success.
And that acquisition is now widely considered to be one of the best deals of the decade.
Yeah. Instagram is a behemoth now.
It is.
It shows you the power of looking outside.
So the takeaway here is that by looking at external data,
Right.
Facebook was able to identify a potential threat, and they addressed it proactively. And they've reaped the rewards.
They have.
And Lyseggen ends the chapter with this really interesting analogy. He compares the power of external data for businesses today to the early visibility that Galileo's telescope provided for the Venetian government.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
So think about it. Back in Galileo's time, the Venetians, they were a maritime power.
Right.
And they relied on ships for trade, for defense. And Galileo came along with his telescope, and suddenly
They could see further.
they could see ships approaching long before they were visible to the naked eye.
Right. Gave them a huge advantage.
Gave them a huge advantage in trade and in warfare, and that's what external data does for businesses today.
Gives you that early warning system.
It gives you that early warning system.
Yeah.
So you can see those opportunities and those threats on the horizon, and you can act accordingly. So, to wrap up our deep dive today,
Yeah,
in a world that's overflowing with data,
absolutely.
looking beyond our own internal metrics is no longer optional. It's essential.
I completely agree.
It's essential for gaining a competitive edge and for making those informed, future-oriented decisions. And we've seen how companies are using outside insight across industries
Yeah, from small startups to global giants.
to navigate the complexities of the modern business landscape. And for our listeners, I want to leave you with this thought. What digital breadcrumbs are out there related to your field, to your company, that might be holding valuable insights? What could you learn by looking outside in? What competitive advantage could you gain?
It's a question worth asking.
Mm-hmm.
We're all leading these trails of data online.
We are.
And it's up to us to figure out how to use them effectively.
To gain that edge.
To see the bigger picture.
To see the bigger picture?
Yeah. And make those smarter decisions.
Absolutely.
That's it for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us.